first things first, updates. As it may have been obvious, I've been streaming a lot in June. It's Pride Month, and I am actually really busy IRL during Pride Month. I have a lot of meetings for planning for Pride actions, and then I have, like, I'm physically disabled, so I can't do things like marches and such, but what I can do quite well is plop my fat ass down in a chair behind a table and shout at people to come look at our table and sign our petitions and such. And so I do that. I do that at events. And those events tend to be on Saturdays. So we didn't see anything last weekend because I was busy at Pride. This upcoming weekend, there's a small town Pride event that I am probably going to be going to table at. So I will most likely not be streaming on Saturday either. And then the weekend after that, my girlfriend's moving in, so I will probably not be streaming on that weekend either. We will probably not see another proper 14 stream until July. Hopefully that will give Albrecht time to catch up, but the fact of the matter is Albrecht is finishing a PhD. That is a time-consuming process. He is very possibly not going to be able to join us until much, much later. Best of luck to him. Like, it sucks not to have an Albrecht around, but, you know, we all understand, I hope, that, you know, taking care of yourself and your career and such are things that matter and are important. So, those are the main updates. On a sort of supplemental note, I will probably do something like this somewhat more frequently, where I just shove myself in a room, turn on the scheme emote, and ramble at you, because I have more and more politics-y things that I feel like I have to talk about, and I'm umming a lot. I am an person. There's a reason I write things and don't give speeches very often. Also, it's 4 a.m. and I'm just kind of improving. But there's a lot of things I feel like I have to say that I have a responsibility to talk about because I have a platform of like 6 viewers. It's not a lot, but also there's some people I think who are wanting to try to feed people into me. So I'll try and do something semi-regular like this. It's certainly not going to be at this time. I haven't picked something. Where I just go over the news and the meanings of that news. And it will have a focus a little bit on Maryland and Maryland's issues, because I'm a Marylander. And then US issues, and then world issues. And there might be some theoretical bit, but I'm not much of a theorist. I have always taken a stance on political theory that runs as basically, we don't know what the future will bring, and all of our best laid plans will crumble. Like, I don't think that the people who were opposing feudalism ever conceived of how capitalism would develop. I think that they had views of what they did not like about feudalism. I think that they had ideas of a world that was great and wonderful without feudalism. And we got something that sort of looked like what they wanted, and definitely in other places wasn't. I sincerely hope. And I feel like, as a socialist, hi, I'm a socialist, fucking cope. I feel like as a socialist, we're gonna have a similar thing. We have a system we live in that has flaws and issues that harm billions, and we have things we don't like about it, and we want those things to change. And should we be successful and actually achieve our goals, which I certainly hope we are, there will be knock-on effects we don't anticipate, and the system we actually end up with will probably look different than anything anyone's proposed. So I'm not super, super, super big on in-depth theoretical analysis. Partly also because I'm not a historian. I'm a mathematician and a data engineer. I don't really have the historical context to do a lot of this theory very well. All I can talk about is what's going on, what I see in the world, and kind of the vibes, which isn't a great basis for theory. But we'll do it. We'll give you some set of current events things. On that note, the allegations. So you'll note my comments are on hold again. This is because I got a lot of transphobia on a short I made for my Final Fantasy 15 video. That short was, I thought, just funny, and I figured most people would understand that going "Prompto, you egg" is a community in-joke for trans people. That short is since gone. I did not delete it. I have actually no idea what happened to that short. It is gone. I did not delete it. I have not received any notes of moderation or anything from YouTube. But in the comments, one of the many transphobic things that I had to remove off of that video, one of the less offensive ones, made an allegation. The allegation stated thus: "You do not have the right to decide who is and is not trans. People saying things like this is why the pendulum is swinging backwards." And that is one hell of an allegation. It's a couple, actually. The first is an allegation that the pendulum has swung towards trans rights. And the second is that calling people eggs is why it's swinging towards oppression. Obviously, it's not a comment in good faith. That if it were a comment in good faith, I would have responded instead of just deleting it. But I think it's an interesting one to talk about, because I am not a young tranny. I am not some 22-year-old on the internet. I am nearly 40. I have had 2 attempts at transition, 1 long period of detransition in between them. I have been married and divorced. I have a successful-ish career. It's a bit precarious, as all trans women's careers are precarious, because we are held to a hyper-vigilant standard, and if we do not achieve the impossible on a regular basis, we can find our attempts, our careers snatched away from us. But the point is that I've been around a while, so I've actually lived through a lot of this, and I can tell you what went on, and we can talk about it. Is there such a thing as this pendulum swinging towards trans rights? So, my first encounter with anything related to being trans was as a youth in rural Nebraska, which is not the best place to be trans. This certainly is worse than other places. But I do want to mention it because it's the 90s, and here's what the circumstances were as a trans youth in the 90s in rural Nebraska. Number 1, we did not have the word trans. It was not in our experience. It was not in our area of conversation. Like, there was no one, when I started having transgender and transsexual feelings as a youth, because it does start when you're a youth, there was no word for it. The closest that you could get were, well, God damn it, why can't I do that? I should be allowed to do that. Or, this is gross, can we get it removed? In reference to testicles, a statement I said to my mother when I was like 4, apparently. I don't recall saying that, but when I came out to her, she's like, "Oh yeah, you asked me that question when you were 4. This tracks." And I'm like, cool. Love that. And then later, like as a teenager, the wonderful statement I still remember saying after a breakup, and I'm sitting there and my friends are like comforting me, and I've got my head down on the lunchroom table, and I'm just like, but like I feel like I'm a lesbian stuck in a dude's body and it sucks. And my friends are just like, what the hell? That's the weirdest thing you've ever said. Psycho. Dude. And I'm like, but it's true. And then one of my friends starts a little betting pool about whether or not I might be a transsexual, because she had heard the term, being a gal from the coast originally. And no one mentioned it to me, otherwise I would have been like, tell me more. But I just want to emphasize that. That's the state in the 90s. Complete ignorance. And in a certain sense, yeah, the pendulum has swung. The internet and access to the internet means that if you are a trans youth nowadays and you have these feelings, you can ask the internet, and the internet will give you a bunch of bullshit. But you'll have a word at least. Let's talk about, like, what happened as a youth in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I attempted to mitigate gender dysphoria. Because you do this. This is what you do when you're trans. You attempt to mitigate dysphoria. Even if you don't have a word, this is what you do. In my case, what I did was a lot of makeup, a lot of skirts, and a lot of self-harm. That's how I mitigated dysphoria as an adolescent. And the community response to it came in 3 phases. Phase number 1 is emote only mode in my chat to avoid having to deal with this shit. And then banning fucking that shit. So phase 1 occurred prior to what I call the Adam affair. And basically, it was kind of fine. I was kind of the right-hand man to one of the popular bullies in my elementary school by virtue of his older sister dating my older brother and us being basically family in his sense. So I could kind of get away with doing whatever the hell I wanted in elementary school and the beginning of middle school because I was just weird. Like, it's weird. I was considered weird, but you know what? Everyone knew the sort of chicks I was into. Everyone knew I liked a girl with glasses and a sharp nose. And, like, that was cool. That was fine. The problem began when actual, like, sexuality became a thing and the asexuality hit. For those who aren't familiar with the experience of being asexual as a youth, you don't. So everyone around you is like, oh my god, I need to fuck her. And you're just like, but why though? Or in my case, you're just like, she's cute, sure, why not? You know who else is cute? Adam. Adam's cute. And Adam is down. Hell yeah, let's go. And thus went 7th grade. And with it, forced outing as some flavor of queer, which led to a lot of violence that I won. Like, the long story short, and I could make it very long, I've made it very long before, is lots of violence, I won. And earned the nickname Psycho in the process. Thus began Phase 2. I don't really count the Adam affair as a phase, because it's only about a month, and I won. But Phase 2 is what I call Psycho pre-Visual K. And that was kind of, everyone was scared of me. So I could do whatever I wanted, but no one, like, I didn't really have very many friends. No one really wanted to hang out. I was very, very isolated. during this time, I made a couple of friends with a couple of gals who would be my best friends through high school. But I had very little in the way of actual contact with most people for a couple years. It was, 8th grade and 9th grade sucked. But during that time, I got really into makeup. I got kind of into this kind of gothy fashion, because if I could, it was not emo yet. Emo didn't become a thing until later, but I could kind of get away with certain things, and it was fine. I started to wear barbed wire jewelry that I made from barbed wire I stole from some neighbors' farms, and at one point, one of my neighbors, an older Catholic guy, is like, "Why are you wearing that?" And I'm like, "Well, it sort of represents the ongoing pain and frustration of having a body and the constant torment of existence within a body." And the dude's like, "That does not seem healthy. That does not seem to be a healthy perspective." No, it wasn't. But that went pretty okay. I dated a couple of people. I was fairly good. I started to get the reputation as, oh, Psycho's pretty chill and cool unless you fuck with him. I would continue to be him for many, many years. I'm not gonna whitewash that. But, Psycho's pretty cool as long as you don't fuck with him, was the possibility. And towards the end of that phrase, I started having more people just kind of be chill with me. This is the time that the homophobe came into my life. By that, I mean he was a kid who had some negative interactions with a gay guy when he was younger that generated an actual phobia of gay people. And so he's like, "You are the gayest person in the school. I would like to be your friend so that I can get over this." And I'm like, okay, cool. It's like, I don't know if there's like a better word for it, because like it's an actual phobia this kid had, but yeah, he ended up being pretty cool. He ended up being pretty supportive. He ended up going and moving into rural Alaska because he had broader like social contact issues, and he's just like, yeah, I can afford to buy land in Alaska, and I'm just gonna move there. And so farewell, Marcus. It was nice knowing you. Last I heard, you were just kind of living there with a gal, hunting and being alone with the two of you. And if that's cool for you, then yay. Sometimes I'm jealous. Not of Alaska, though. That sounds cold. Oh my god. But anyway, we enter phase 3 shortly after. The autobiography of Barb. I swear I'm coming to a point here. Phase 3 happened when a Japanese exchange student visited our high school and brought with her love of Visual Kei from the 90s. And it swung through the school, and suddenly I went from being the weird kid who cross-dresses but is pretty cool otherwise to being hot and sexy and in demand. And oh boy, I fucked. I fucked. I have bastards from this era. And it helped my confidence a whole hell of a lot. It's, I think, part of the reason why I am able to be pretty outspoken despite being an anxious mess, because I understood that you could be hot. Those are the egg errors, and I think it's important to understand that there were some themes that ran through this, and that at no point did a pendulum really swing. Like, during the same era, other trans people I knew got, say, in the case of one of my friends from college, beaten so hard that her eye came out. Like, that is the norm. I was the exception. I was the exception because I had good fortune and privilege, and I exploited it. So, in a sense, the pendulum has sort of swung, because that doesn't seem to be the norm anymore. It is not the norm presently in 2025 that you are going to get beaten until your eye comes out. You're not very likely to get thrown out by your parents and forced to adapt to a life of sex work at the age of 16, as another one of my friends from college had to do. That stuff still happens, but it does not seem to be the norm anymore. Let's talk a little bit about how the norm developed, because from a point of view of transition, when I was in college, I learned I was trans, and at that time, the requirement for transition in the US was managed. So you went out, you got a shrink, you talked to the shrink, you convinced the shrink you were trans, you did real life experience, and then if you were lucky, the shrink would give you hormones. Or else you would go do some black market stuff. In my case, there was a sort of bit of violence that I was not involved in that made me go, maybe I don't want to do this. It motivated my long period of detransition. But that was the thing at the age. Like, my first transition attempt never started hormones because I was in the process of trying to get appointments with shrinks. And a lot of that involved me doing RLE, which I did in a different city than I lived in because I didn't want to risk my career doing RLE, which I know is not the point of RLE, and if the shrink found out could have caused me problems. But we had photos and we had all the documents and we were like documenting it. So it's like, chill, dude. Hi, if you for some reason met Lillian Andre in Des Moines around 2005, hi, she's Barb now. Not my legal name. No legal documentation around there. No photos that I'm aware of still exist because the violence led to me burning everything pretty dramatically. I regret it, actually, but it is what it is. But the point is, you had to go do that. You had to go out, you had to basically cross-dress full-time, at least in some part of your life where you could show it to a shrink and be like, look, I'm woman, give me thing. You had to emphasize any attraction to men, de-emphasize any attraction to women, any asexuality, anything like that. You just had to convince some cis dude that you were trans enough. And that went until a couple years after I detransitioned. And that was, I think, 2007 is when that started to change, when informed consent really started to become the norm in places and spread. But I wasn't aware of it. I had detransitioned. I spent my next decade firmly in the closet, got married, had kids. Yay! Ruined my health. Because you still have to manage dysphoria even if you detransition for fear. And in my case, I managed dysphoria with alcoholism. Hooray! My liver hates me. But this is also when, this same period is when people talk about the pendulum swinging. And I can kind of see it because it's part of what motivated me to retransition. And in this period, looking at this, here's what happened. Just as someone alive and an adult during this period, here's what happened. RuPaul's Drag Race became popular. And people were like, yo, trans people. Of course, the average person thought of a trans person as a drag queen, not a trans person, but like, it started entering the public consciousness. And most people reacted the way my mother did. Oh, well, if that's what's good for them, I suppose that's fine. And that's it. Alongside that, you had informed consent coming through, where people who had access, all they theoretically had to do was say, hi, I'm trans, give me hormones, have the doctor tell them, and then you sign a couple forms, and then you get your hormones. In theory, that's how it's supposed to work, informed consent. In practice, no. And then in 2020, Supreme Court was like, yeah, you can't discriminate against trans people in employment. That's basically sex discrimination. Like, if you wouldn't fire a woman for wearing makeup, you can't fire a man. If you wouldn't fire a woman for having tits. You can't fire a man for having tits. Like, you have to chill about that. And that's basically it. So, what happened? Like, that's the pendulum swing that everyone is so on about, is you can't get fired at work. People don't want to beat you to death anymore on average, and you can, in theory, go to the doctor and just ask for hormones if you're an adult. So, what happened? Well, one more thing happened during this time, and that is something that's always been happening behind the corners. If you are a trans youth and you get taken into trans youth care, if you convince the doctor that you're trans, they give you transition care. That's always been there. That's been the case since, like, forever. It just became a little easier to convince the doctor because they know what's going on more. Blanchard's whole bullshit disappeared. And there was a little bit less pushback because the medical science understood that mitigating dysphoria is easier when you start younger. And that's what you need to do if you have someone who comes to you and is trans. Wow, what a shocker. That's it. That's the pendulum swing. So what happened? What happened on the flip side? How did the world respond? Well, number one, we got solidified into the public consciousness of trans people equals drag queens, because RuPaul's Drag Race got popular. And that's the thing people saw. It's not accurate. Trans people aren't drag queens. And even that kind of, like, one step in, trying to meet cis people halfway statement that was popular around the time I started privately transitioning, where you say, well, the difference between me and a drag queen is I'm this all the time, baby. It doesn't come off. Isn't really accurate, because drag is a performance. Drag is a thing for entertainment. Drag is adopting the feminine to sort of mock and critique how society associates with the feminine for the sake of entertainment. That's what drag is. And trans isn't like that. Being trans is adapting the feminine or the masculine, as is the case, to alleviate a sense of innate wrongness and discomfort that is not just like, oh, my sweater's itchy, but like, my sweater is itchy and it has been itchy for the last 12 years and it gets worse and worse and worse and I can never take it off or scratch or anything. Please help. Like, it's bad. It's worse than that. It is disassociation. It is constant brain fog. It is an inability to see yourself as having any value or worth. It is an inability to care what happens tomorrow. It is a lot of bad, and it's fixable. So that's like one of the big things. Society started viewing transness as something akin to drag, which is like a fashion statement, a bodily cosmetic. And when you think of it that way, a lot of stuff that, like, cis allies, alleged allies, say about, well, you know, it makes sense. Hi, you're valid. You don't need those hormones. You're valid either way. Well, thanks, but actually I need the hormones because when I'm on hormones, my brain fog clears up in part, my depression basically disappears, and I have higher levels of energy for all aspects of my life. So actually I do kind of need those hormones. They matter. I don't hate myself when I see my fat distribute in a feminine manner instead of a masculine one, actually. So this is less of one for me. I don't really have facial hair dysphoria, but I have friends who do, and they tell me that they need electrolysis because when they see a 5 o'clock shadow, they want to die. And, like, I have some bottom dysphoria I would like to get handled, and that's a familiar thing. Like, oh, yes, I am walking down the stairs to meet a delivery driver, and a testicle has rubbed my leg, and I want to rip out my eyes and throw myself in front of a bus. And, like, that's not a normal feeling. It's a feeling that is, in fact, bad, and we would like to not have. I think all people can agree. That is not a feeling you want to exist and experience. So, goodness, this is a rant and a ramble. But that's the distinction, right? That's what transness is versus this image of transness as a cosmetic performance. But the idea of transness as a cosmetic performance really hits into people's minds. And then that gets reinforced with our association with kind of sexual minorities. The LGBTQIA+, which we are all in solidarity. That acronym and that connection exists for a reason. Like, gender and sexuality interplay a lot. If you are trans, you're gonna interact with sexuality differently, right? Like, my experience of being a spectrum. I'm not even going to talk. We're not going to approach the weirdness of my asexuality and how that works. But like an A-spec trans lesbian, let's say, that's a good way to mention it. That's a different thing than if I were just like A-spec woman attracted cis man. That's a different thing. It's a different relationship to that attraction. It's a different thing. As someone on Blue Sky, I'm not quite sure exactly who it was. I think it might have been Talia Bot. Said, "Of course I transitioned for sex reasons. I want to fuck women as a woman." Like, yeah. Like, of course there's a sex reason. There's a driving factor of wanting to, like, alleviate your dysphoria. But yeah, I think just about every person who exists as a human being in the universe has a sort of intertwined sex reason for things. Like, yeah. And that ties in with transition. Like, if you're straight, how much of your life, stop and think, how much of your life is involved in making the capacity for your heterosexuality? Because I'll tell you, a lot of my life is involved in making the capacity for your heterosexuality. It's got a technical term in queer discourse. It's called the heterosexual regime. It's about how all of society is shaped around enabling straight relationships, and that makes things annoying and difficult for not straight people in lots and lots and lots of ways. We're not here to talk about that now. Like, I just want it to be a thing that you're aware of. I had a point with this. Where was I going? All right. So what's been the fallout? Because youth transition's been a thing. That's where we were. We were in youth transition. Because youth transition's always been a thing, and because informed consent's becoming more of a model, and that's percolating everywhere, that's a thing that's hitting anger. And the details of how this goes forward, talking about Younger and Singal and Rowling, is a little bit less important, I think, right now than realizing that what happened is around 2016 or so, the sorts of people who hate gays realized that trans misogyny wasn't dissolving. So, if you're familiar with kind of homophobia and the history of homophobia, when people started seeing gay people as their neighbors, homophobia started dissolving. It ran into a major hiccup with the AIDS crisis, but it just started. The more people see gay people as people who just live next to them, the less they hate gay people, on average. And what we saw in the 2010s was that did not happen so much for trans people. The more you saw trans people, the more you saw people transitioning, you got some people who are like, oh, well, this is just fine. But a lot of people didn't have that. For, let's say, currently unknown reasons, I am personally fond of the second wave reconstructionist explanations, but I think it's important to note that this is not a resolved area of understanding. Still, for reasons, we just need the 4 reasons. That's what we need now, because we're talking about this alleged pendulum swing. Allegedly, the pendulum should have been swinging in favor of rights, and it wasn't. And the people who hate gays, I want to emphasize, these people doing this are people who hate gays. They don't just hate trans people, they hate gay people in general. These are the people who were against gay marriage, who were against Lawrence v. Texas, who were against providing treatment to HIV. These are the same people, a lot of them. Some of them have died over the time, but a lot of them are exactly the same people who were cheering on the mass deaths of gay men during the HIV/AIDS crisis. The people who hate gays realized that trans people could be a lever. That the society wasn't getting over trans misogyny in particular, as well as it got over transphobia. Homophobia. Transphobia, it's also not getting over. But, like, trans misogyny is the emphasis because that's where all of the everything points. With one exception, which we will get to in a moment. Trans guys know exactly what I'm going to be talking about, but I want to mention it, just like emphasize it's mostly a trans misogynistic thing. I think anyone who really looks knows it's mostly a trans misogynistic thing. But yeah, they start throwing at the wall anything they think might stick, because that's what they do. They throw the bathroom thing, the scary men in bathrooms. They throw teachers. Look at these scary men dressing themselves as women to attract your daughters in the classroom. They're like all the way down. All of these things that they're swinging. They throw out a couple of trans men. Like, oh no, protect our daughters from the irreversible damage. And then you see the little girl with the hole where her uterus is, because that's apparently all a woman is to these people. And to the benefit of society, none of it really stuck. Like, people who hated trans people were like, yay, but everyone else was like, they're just pissing. Youth getting medical care is fine, actually. That's a decision between doctors and their youths. And then something stuck, and I'm still a little flabbergasted that this is what stuck. Sports. We must protect the women's sports. That's the thing that stuck. And this is part of the reason why I really like the second wave revivalist explanations of everything that's... Hi, it's 5 a.m. That's actually normal at 5 a.m. I normally get up about 4 a.m. and sit up, and I have a CPAP, so like phlegm gets built up and then it kind of falls down my throat around this time. Hi, I normally don't stream at 5 a.m. That's on the audio forever. Hi, that's Barb dying. But anyway, sports. I like the one of the reasons I like the second wave revivalist explanations that are coming out now is they really explain nicely why sports stuck. Sports stuck because as a society, we still think of women as inferior to men. And that's the threat of transition, is proving that lie. That's ultimately, I think, the threat of transition. That's the thing that people don't like. That's the reason that people go, wah, must stop the trans, is it wears down this barrier between the sexes, and a lot of Western society and Western culture is built on this idea that men and women are very, very different and opposed, and women are inferior to men. And like, even people that are allegedly progressive will mention things like that. The strip pole archer guy was making some comments about muscle mass and women, and I like, yes, all of your facts are correct, but also I have read the study from the 90s that the military did. Goodness, I need to actually find that and like shove it in a description. I won't, because I have a day job. But it's in the 90s, basically, the military tried to do a study to prove that women shouldn't serve in combat capacity, and that study, long story short, managed to attribute the vast majority of physical differences between men and women to cultural concerns. So, like, hi, did you know that if you, as a woman, do not feel the need to diet and deny your body needed nutrition during your adolescence, and also go ahead and do your exercise, you will be strong like man? Because the reason women not strong as man is our culture encourages adolescent women during their growth periods to starve themselves and to not exercise, which carries onward. Yeah, fun. But anyway, that myth, that idea of women being inferior, like, that hits in sport. And a lot of people think that women's sports are separate than men's sports because of this. Now, if we know our history, we know that the real reason women's sports are different from men's sports is either A, men were trying to rape the women, or B, women were beating the men and men were salty about it. Like, that's where the women's leagues come from. Those. Ta-da! But most people don't know about that. Most people just know women's league separate from men's league, and also, in the back of the mind, culturally, women inferior, dependent upon, and under threat from men. So, whereas the bathroom situation is, oh, well, they're just pissing, chill. The sports situation becomes unfair advantage, threat, danger, and it's stuck, and it became the lever. And with the lever getting pulled and squeezed and twisted, they can start squeezing all the other things in. Like, oh my gosh, if trans women are actually men and trans men are actually women, and oh my god, they're a danger in sports, well, maybe we shouldn't allow them to change their gender marker on their IDs anymore. Maybe that's like a deception. Gender markers IDs have been changed since the 1970s. That has been a thing since before I was born. Okay? Like, there was actually a case when I was in high school of a woman who transitioned. She became a woman. She transitioned to woman. She did her whole requirements for gender marker change on birth certificate under Nebraska law, which are strenuous. Like, full GRS, have to be fuckable to become a woman under Nebraska law, because Nebraska is weird and run by perverts. But she did it, and then she met a guy, and then they got married, and there was a big brouhaha, because this was, like, way before Obergefell v. Hodge, and it went to the Nebraska Supreme Court. Nebraska Supreme Court basically went, yeah, that's not a same-sex marriage. She met all the requirements to be a woman, so this is an opposite-sex marriage. It's fine. Chill. So silly. But anyway, like, it's been going on. Like, gender marker changes are not a new thing that came around with a wash of trans rights. They've just been there forever. They were discussed in the 70s. Like, people were changing sex. I think it's important to note, people were changing sex, and the law was like, well, we have to learn how to recognize when people change sex. Because transition changes sex. I need that to be in your head. It's not, oh, sex is immutable, and you're there and you're changing your gender. Transition changes sex. Cope. Sex is a mutable category. But alas, getting your gender marker changed to align with your changed sex, that is now illegal in places. They don't do it in Louisiana. They don't do it in Florida. They want to make it not happen in Texas. They want to get rid of your name changes. They want to make it harder to change your name on your birth certificate. And they want to roll back your legal work protections. And they want to deny the health care. Because that's where it boils down to. There's a current that runs through Western society that is very important to a certain set of patriarchal, white supremacist, male supremacist, evangelical types. And that says men and women are different, those categories cannot be shifted, and men are superior. And being trans proves that wrong. Just by existence. Because we do change our sex. That's the whole damned point of the transition. We do change our sex. In every way that matters, we change sex. Maybe we don't produce a different gamete or whatever, but no one gives a damn about that when you're looking at sex. In the street, no one gives a damn. The guy who looks at me and goes, "Hey, fat girl, have some fun," is not looking at my gamete production. He's looking at my big tits, my big ass, and my thunder thighs and being a fucking pervert. That's what dude do. But people don't like it. People do not like that. And they're railing against it. Because if their worldview demands these sexes be separate, the solution is to mandate it by law. So what does that mean for everyone watching this? I hope my rambling has at least gone, hey, that allegation of a swinging pendulum being driven by trans women calling people eggs is nonsense. Mostly because I've outlined how it goes through without once mentioning trans women calling people eggs, which is a thing that started online in the late 2010s after the whole process began. Like, it's a community in-joke. Let me be very clear. When I look at FF15 and say, Prompto, you're such an egg, I mean, Prompto, you are behaving the way that I behaved when I was your age. Only you don't wear a skirt. But you know what? Also, when I was Prompto's age, I didn't wear a skirt because I stopped wearing skirts when I was like 17. And I didn't really wear skirts again outside of special occasions until like 2020. And honestly, I mostly wear skirts nowadays because I'm fat. It's a pain in the ass to try to find pants that fit comfortably. So I just go, fuck it, I can get this elastic waistband maxi skirt that I can just flop over my gut and let flop down around my ankles, and it's fine. I'm just gonna do that. I am not fashion. I'm your fat Midwestern mom. Fucking cope. It's basically the same thing, actually, that my mom started doing when she was like 50, where she just started wearing sweatpants all the time because she got a little chubby and she couldn't be bothered to deal with women's pant sizes anymore. So she just started wearing drawstring sweatpants. It's like, yeah, mood. Drawstring sweatpants are tough to find in my size, but it's okay. What's going on now? There should be a call to action, and the call to action is, as it always is, call your senators. The big, beautiful bill has a reconciliation coming through Senate, and that reconciliation did not remove bans on Medicaid coverage of transition or CHIP coverage of transition. And this is actually a lot more serious, I think, than people are inclined to believe. Like, I think when people look at this, they say, well, maybe the government shouldn't cover your transition. And you're wrong, but I can see your argument, right? That's not, like, a drastically horrible thing, with a couple exceptions. Number one, there's a lot of impoverished trans people who have already transitioned and are hormone dependent. Like, if you're a trans woman who's had an orchiectomy, you're hormone dependent. I'm not sure what the equivalent for trans men is, but I'm sure there is one where you become hormone dependent. There are people who are just hormone dependent because their dysphoria is so extreme. Like, any of those people will die. Maybe not immediately, maybe not swiftly, but it's almost worse if it's slow and painful. And I think that's the point. Like, a lot of the people who are in favor of this in the politics end, a lot of the Republicans making this call, they want people to die. They like the idea of trans people being dead or gone. That's fine to them. Well, it's not fine to me, and it shouldn't be fine to you. That on its own should be enough for you to call your senators and say, hey, this reconciliation is not acceptable. Oppose it. Do not pass. But there's an additional knock-on effect. Where does private insurance get its guidelines for what to cover? Because private insurance has a tendency to follow Medicaid. And private insurance has a tendency to deny anything it feels like it can get away with denying. And I'm already seeing this. My new insurance is not covering my hormone treatments. As I am in discussions with my doctor for the procedure that makes me hormone dependent, my insurance is going, wow, it might be cosmetic. I mean, I know that my pushback is going to succeed at this point, but if Medicaid, if there's any sort of law or legal precedent that they can lean into and say, well, we don't have to cover this, they're going to stop. And that means suddenly a lot of people who are hormone dependent, who are working jobs to get their insurance to cover things, you know, the doing things the right way, as the conservatives like to call it. Like, they've got their jobs, they've got their insurance, they're paying for their procedures, they're being responsible adults in the marketplace. They're gonna find their coverage redacted, stripped away. And hormone treatments are not cheap if you're trans feminine, and they are not legal without doctor's intervention if you're transmasculine. So, like, my doctor's appointments could become an issue. My hormones are $200 a month without insurance. Like, I'm fortunate enough that I can budget and adjust my budget and afford $200 a month, but also, that's a lot. That's enough to make me consider maybe I should be trying to DIY again, because I can secure DIY hormones for significantly cheaper than that if I'm willing to acquire uncompounded and then compound. And in considerations is I have to review the legality. I live in a different state than I did when I DIY'd before, so I have different laws I have to consider. But these are things that if you're a doctor and you're hearing this, you're going, wait, no, this is bad. And yeah, it's bad. This is a thing that will affect every trans person. And when you come out the other side, it's going to be the very privileged who are fine, and everyone else who is slightly fucked. And I would hope that my viewers, who aren't watching now, it's 5:30 in the morning, but I would hope that my viewers would know that that's something to call your congressperson about. Your senators in particular at this time. And so you should do that. Call your senators. Tell them not to accept any budget bill reconciliation that cuts trans coverage from Medicaid. Ideally also chip. I'm going to be a little mean and strategic here and get into a little bit of trouble and say, I think that that's probably okay in the short term. We don't want it because youth transition has better outcomes. We want youths to be able to transition. But these kids should be able to reach into their parents' healthcare coverage, I'm hoping. I don't know. Like, ideally, tell your senators, no chip ban, no Medicaid ban. But, like, if they have to do one, the Medicaid is more important just because it's more people. I hate that we're in the fucking situation where you have to say that. So, there we are. In conclusion, do that. One final thing. Sarah, is it transphobic of me to say, Sarah McBride, you're a fucking Uncle Tom? Like, is that misgendering, or do we understand enough about the socio-cultural baggage around that term to go, aha, you're an Uncle Tom. Treasonous, two-faced bitch. Because, oh my god, that is what she is. Well, that's all I have to say. I will see if there's enough people hanging around to make it worth rating. I do not believe that there is. Nope. Thank you for your time, and remember, you are trans. You person listening to this, you are trans. You must transition. You do not have a choice. Stop fighting the will of the gods. Start the estrogen right now. I am erasing trans men because I am an evil monster. Rah, rah, shish boom ba. Something, something in the jaw. That's what happened to my bestie when she tripped on the sidewalk. Okay, that's enough. Goodbye.